Let's go.
You're listening to Making Data Simple, where we make the world of data effortless, relevant, and yes, even fun.
Hello, podcast listeners. You're probably confused right now that like I'm a singer. No, I'm not a singer. I am your podcast host, Al Martin here. Thank you for joining us. Hope everyone is extremely well in podcast land, and thank you for listening. The topic we have today for you is AI. We always have data, right? And the foundation or entrepreneurship in tech companies. It's going to be a good discussion. Today, I have Dr. Eric Daimler with me. Eric is an authority in artificial intelligence. He's got over 20 years experience in the field. He leads MIT's first ever spinout from its math department, and he has co-founded 6 technology companies that have pioneered work in fields ranging from software systems to statistical arbitrage. As a presidential innovation fellow during the Obama administration, Eric helped drive the agenda for U.S. leadership in research, commercialization, and public adoption of AI. He's everything. I think you're everything, right? Entrepreneur, executive, investor, technologist, policy advisor, author of a new book. I think it's The Coming Composability, the roadmap for using technology to solve society's biggest problems. And then on his copious spare time, he serves as assistant dean and associate professor of software engineering in Carnegie Mellon School of Computer Science. There he focuses on the intersection of machine learning, computational linguistics, and network science. Eric, how did I do?
Well, that is a very kind introduction. I'll be sure to tell my wife all these things. Yeah.
Well, it's quite a resume. I have to say, that's quite a resume.
Thank you.
Nicely done.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll see. We'll see what your listeners will say then after I speak. But thank you.
Well, we'll put you to the test. We'll have some funny. No, great resume. But why don't you introduce yourself? Forget the resume. Put it aside. Talk to your experience. What brings you here ultimately? All right. What's the path that brought you here?
Yeah. Well, it could be good to be here, Al. Thank you for having me. I am often known for the time that I spent with the Obama administration, acting in the capacity of an AI authority during the last year of that administration. That was a good time, fantastic people. We did some really good work laying out an agenda for research and coordinating the efforts across the executive branch. It's really a bipartisan concern to make sure that American technical leadership and really Western technical leadership continues in the coming decades. That perspective was a fantastic culmination of years spent as an AI researcher at Carnegie Mellon, at Stanford, and at University of Washington, Seattle, along with some terrific entrepreneurial journeys with great business partners and time as a venture capital investor on Sand Hill Road. What I came to find out through that very large privileged perspective in the US federal government was that investors, entrepreneurs, and consumers, users were going to be disappointed with some of the expressions of AI with which they were experimenting, with which they are experimenting. We've been fascinated with AI with many of these very sexy breakthroughs, such as the challenge for autonomous cars in the early 2000s to some algorithmic breakthroughs in the late 2000s where deep learning came into its own and DeepMind was able to beat some champions in Go. Those are fantastic and they capture the popular imagination, but expressing those into commercially appropriate applications has proven to be more of a challenge than we might otherwise have thought. Early on in my investing career, I was told to be careful about confusing a clear vision with a short-term time horizon. I think many of us have confused that with regard to AI and robotics. We thought autonomous cars were going to be here, and to hear Elon Musk tell it, they'll be here next year, and next year they'll be here next year.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? It's always next year. It's like I'm waiting for a while there. It was like it was right there. We're having it. It's over. You might as well get out of the way. It's autonomous cars. Don't even buy a regular car anymore. And now we're still waiting for next year, right?
We really are. Yeah. It's a funny anecdote that, a lot of people haven't appreciated how long it's taken us to get where we are today with autonomous technology. I have some good friends still in that business in various capacities. And I won't put you on the spot, but your listeners and you can imagine in your heads what the first year was. So your listeners can imagine what the first year was where autonomous vehicle went down a public road. So just have that year in your mind. When was the first vehicle on a U.S. public road going down by itself, no driver? So you think, well, was that 2005? Was that 2000?
I would have probably been crazy and even went earlier than that.
1983.
1983. I was going to go with 1970 or something, but that makes sense. So who did that, by the way?
Carnegie Mellon's Field Robotics Center with the fantastic professor, Red Whitaker, who later went on to teach some terrifically talented students. One of those then went on to lead the Stanford team that ultimately beat the Carnegie Mellon team in a grand challenge for off-road autonomous driving. This has been going on for decades. And
so what? Why is it taking so long? Is it a technical issue, or is it a human expectation, perception, acceptance issue?
It's a technical issue, to be sure. There are definitely regulatory issues to overcome, and the initial instantiation of autonomous driving was modest. It was a very big van with some massive computing power in the back with 1983 technology, driving down a public road in Pittsburgh at 5 miles per hour in good weather. So that was modest. Mercedes at the time had something that could drive on a freeway a little faster, but it had to follow a very clear white line. That's an easier problem. These difficulties around vision and around computation have improved over the decades, not just because of Moore's Law. Our understanding about how these different sensors need to be integrated better have improved over the years. We've used LiDAR, we've used radar. Tesla famously thinks that they don't need LiDAR in their autonomous vehicles. So anyway, the point is these have all improved, and these are really hard problems. They're just really hard. And so they'll just continue to take a long time. On the last point we can say on this is that the level of autonomy it matters. So when people talk about full autonomy, we should be careful, because full autonomy means, the literal definition, level 5, means that a machine can operate in all circumstances. And that's almost a religious statement because, there's going to be some circumstances. Snow would be a good, easy one where we may need human intervention for quite some time.
The good news is 1983, you could play Pac-Man in your autonomous bus if you were out there. Anyway. All right. So look, I got a couple questions before I forget, and I'm going to come back. I'll probably go a little bit all over the place. You said it was bipartisan. Was it really bipartisan? Is anything bipartisan?
So the group with whom I worked in the Obama White House was colloquially known as the Science Advisory Group.
Yeah.
I can say that from firsthand experience, that group was apolitical. The people with whom I worked, some of those people continued into the next administration. Some of those people continued into the next administration and are again in this administration. So I think in that way, many of those people were trying to represent American interests, or what, even more broadly, perhaps the interests of America and its allies. I think that everybody can get behind the idea that the government, in whatever form it takes, should be doing its best work together. That we will all benefit by having the different branches of the executive, the State Department, the Defense Department, the Department of Health and Human Services, coordinating their research activity and any other efforts around technology and science as much as possible. In that way, I think it's a bipartisan effort. We didn't talk politics in this group. That's the West Wing, right? So the West Wing, they're the political people, but we didn't do that.
Well, why'd you leave? Did you get bored? Did you get kicked out for your radical ideas? What?
Right. I intended to be there only for a period of time. I stuck around only for a few weeks into the next administration, and that was a little awkward. Science wasn't given the same level of priority in the next administration as it was during the Obama administration.
Hey, and one last question. I want to come back to this, but did you ever fly on Air Force One, man?
Air Force One is as cool as you think it is.
So is that a yes?
Yeah, I've been in Air Force One, and I will tell you the funny anecdote I remember about that is it has very tight security. It's just it's an unusual experience. It is unlike any other sort of private airplane. Of course, it is a lovely place to be. Many presidents have said that that is one thing they miss, and I will tell you, as an infrequent passenger, I can understand.
Good for you, man. I have not had that opportunity. So hey, look, I want to go through a lot of different questions that I have, but you said something that caught my attention. You said around AI, I won't get this right, but you said you can come to be disappointed. There's some sexy breakthroughs. So last week, just as soon as last week, I visited a customer. I visit customers all the time. I'm responsible for tech sales here at IBM. And, I went to go talk to clients about their future. And when I go in there, I talk about data fabric. We talk about security, all the topics of the day. And at one point in time, I said, hey, what's your AI strategy? And they kind of laughed and they looked at me and they said, we don't talk about AI around here. And I said, and I get where they were going. I said, all right, well, let's talk about machine learning then, or whatever. The point was, hey, it's sexy. And they even went on to talk about it a little bit. We get sold a lot of sexy breakthroughs. And, we're going to wait out until we think there's something tangible. It's explainable. We know what we're getting. And it's not a magic show. And I presume in the academic world, you don't get that sentiment. It's not quite the same. People get it and they know it's computer science. But I don't know. You also said, hey, sometimes people come to be disappointed.
I usually am not terribly fond of people being technology laggards.
Me neither.
I usually want people to be experimenting with technology for reasons we can get into, besides just the fascination with it, right? I want to actually be commercially responsible. Often boards of directors are there not to just be nerdy, right? They're there to provide real commercial value. Where I claim that companies are often misled in their AI initiatives is they're looking in the wrong place. Algorithms are not the constraint on a company's satisfaction with AI. And it's often even not data collection at this point that is the constraint on companies' success with AI. I think many people have gotten the memo that data is the new oil, or whatever the little cliche is around that. There's a lot of data being collected. I think what people are not appreciating is the infrastructure to support that data collection and that integration of data. That's really been the surprise for me. That's what I saw at the very highest levels, which is that we are increasing data year over year in a way that is really difficult to comprehend by itself. Quadratic explosions are tough to get our head around. We can just think about the explosion in COVID cases, and that is what quadratic explosions, or often people call them exponential explosions, a little different. look like. They're difficult for us to get our head around. What that is compounded by is the equally large increase in data sources. So you have a quadratic explosion in data sources. Think all the sensors from Internet of Things or any number of other ways we collect data around the world. Quadratic explosion in data sources, quadratic explosion in the data generated itself from any one of those sources, and you have an incomprehensibly large increase in data relationships. And data relationships are the instantiation of knowledge, of wisdom. They're the foundation upon which any large organization builds value. Capturing that data relationship between the data generated from all these data sources into some reliable way that can then be operationalized to gain advantage over competitors relative to market dynamics and customer behavior, that is completely misunderstood from the deepest levels all the way up to the board. That is the foundation for disappointment from executives in technology, executives in the business lines, and investors at the board level.
The only thing I would, I don't know if it's a counter. I get everything you're saying, and to me, it's around the infrastructure, the governance, the cleanliness. We got data. In my terms, there's a lot of data swamps out there. I mean, a ton. Most of the people I talk to do understand that, and they're trying to correct it. The question is how do they work up that ladder to AI as quickly as possible? It's almost a monumentous task from their perspective. I'm talking a lot of the CTOs, et cetera, but they're having a hard time getting from point A to point B such that they could proceed to AI. When you're talking with a lot of these business owners, you're saying that they don't appreciate some of the data issues they do have today and their inability to work up that ladder?
Not that people don't understand this is hard, but I think there's a lack of appreciation of how hard and how to solve that problem. Because AI algorithms are sexy, they're fun, they're interesting to talk about, but data engineering, kind of the precursor to doing the sexy algorithm work, that's much less interesting. Often it involves, in many cases, vocational level IT. The billions and billions of dollars that are consumed every year through the likes of Tata and Wipro and Tibco, and to say nothing of Accenture or Deloitte, it does this manual preparation in data engineering before you even can get to the sexy, interesting work around AI. That's really the problem. There's very, very few companies that have matured enough in their own infrastructure to then realize that the problem is deeper than the machine learning algorithms or the subset of that, the deep learning algorithms. That the problem is actually more foundational than computer science, where my PhD is in. It's actually at the level of math. We are entering a new epoch where we are going to shift from this framework of logic to this framework of composability. And that is registered in this mathematical domain called categorical algebra or category theory. For people that aren't familiar, they may be more familiar with type theory. It's kind of related to type theory, but it's in the semantics, not the syntax. It's also, it can be thought of as where my research was in graph theory, but it's like graph theory with a little more structure. It's at that level of math that we change the frame to how to solve these problems around data relationships. There are other expressions of that today, but often people just look at the expressions. One expression is in a blockchain and smart contracts. That's not composability in itself. That is an expression of composability. Also in quantum computing, that's not composability itself. That's an expression of composability. We as humans wouldn't be able to understand what a quantum compiler even does, or whether or not to validate a quantum compiler's accuracy without composable systems through type theory or category theory. Those are different expressions of composability. That's the new framework. That's where this math is showing up in other domains. What I'm claiming is that this is the bottleneck behind companies in using databases. That is the biggest issue behind fulfilling on the promise for AI, regardless of whether it's a data fabric or a data mesh, or you're using data lakes or Databricks' marketing speak of lake houses. Those are all beside the point. Any one of those is going to fail with their ability to scale for their data relationships without a more foundational look at the math.
So putting that all together, though, summarizing, where are we with AI? I mean, Mr. President, here's the situation.
We are at the place where we are building a sort of data tower of Babel, or Babel. How do we pronounce that? I'm not sure. Yeah, that is what we're building, a data tower of Babel. That the amount of data we have is, in order to be properly linked in a provable way, is really beyond current processes. So a lot of people will use RDF. A lot of web pages are built on RDF, or it's the subsequent technology OWL. Those can't scale. They will not scale. They're based on linear algebra, kind of math that saw its commercial application explode in 1972, and then in 1975, you had relational databases get founded. That epic is now over. The math of the 21st century, the math that's more appropriate is for a digital age is type algebra, categorical algebra, type theory, category theory. Those are, and probability and statistics. That's the math of the 21st century. And that's where we are, Mr. President. I can give you a story about this where, as companies scale and they begin to realize their difficulty with scaling, we worked with one company, a famous ride-sharing company, that, like every other company, grew up concentrating on their business, not concentrating on their ideal IT infrastructure. So in this particular case, developed 800 and then pretty soon 8,000 different databases, different jurisdictions. So they couldn't do analysis for to look at what would the driver supply be over Super Bowl weekend in Dallas, along with the whole state of Texas. They had to do Dallas and then do a statistical comparison with Houston, and then do another one for Austin, let alone the whole state of Texas or the whole United States, or a different region. They had to do statistical comparisons. They tried solving that problem for what then became 300,000 databases. That wasn't solvable with RDF or with OWL or with throwing $100 million even at Accenture or Tata or Wipro or Tibco. That was solvable really at a deeper level. Even with these very, very smart people and an effectively infinite balance sheet to fund an optimal IT infrastructure, they realized they couldn't do it on their own. So we went in and helped them solve that problem, where, to have them tell it, they saved somewhere in the order of high 7 figures, low 8 figures a year, making their business decisions more quickly and with more confidence, because they're solving it at the level of categorical algebra. They're integrating 300,000 databases at the level of categorical algebra.
Did they have to, I'm just curious, I mean, did they have to start all over, redo it? I mean, when you have that many databases, they clean it up and do a do-over, or what how do you correct that problem?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, doing it over is not feasible. That's the old way of doing it. The story there is explains the genesis of this technology. You and I, as U.S. taxpayers, paid far more than we would have had to in developing the new Defense Department's Joint Strike Fighter when it got developed, because we had to start all over. We had to start from scratch. All of the learnings that's
where it's going.
Yeah, well, that's why it was. That's one of the reasons it had such cost overruns, because we were flying F-16s for many decades, learning all the ways in which avionics would be expressed on that particular platform, and we couldn't migrate these learnings on these ancient technologies into a modern system in the context where lives were at stake. It couldn't be depended on. You can't use these probabilistic models from machine learning or deep learning, right? Although it's a subset and they're all probabilistic. You can't use those models in a life and death context of avionics. So you can't just start all over. No, fundamentally, to categorical algebra is using the existing systems and creating a provable mapping between these two systems. That's how these get expressed. I can use a story actually about that, where we've worked with a hospital group in New York City. I didn't know this would happen in this hospital group, that they have different definitions for diabetes. If you and I go look in the Oxford English Dictionary, we can find a definition of diabetes, and it's just really there, the definition of diabetes. But across one hospital group, for whatever reason, call it because of timing, but more often because of the use case, the definition for diabetes in one group might be yes, no, the patient has diabetes. Yes, no, that's a column on the table, column in the database. Does the patient have diabetes? Yes, no. In another department might have the same patient, but the definition of diabetes in that use case might be drug research, might be a different clinical purpose, might have a definition of diabetes saying something to the effect of, well, diabetes, how are we treating it? And then a third one might say diabetes, how long ago? A fourth one, they might be well-meaning, and they might put a whole bunch of unstructured data in that cell, in that column, in that table, which is, well, Eric had diabetes and they didn't have it, and we've been treating it this way. A whole bunch of other sort of unstructured data in there. That is one hospital group having different semantics for the same underlying issue called diabetes. That's an example of the complications of expressiveness inside of a large database, inside of one company, the integration of which is very, very difficult and often just gets ignored because of its difficulty and expense. And that's what we mean when we're talking about the difficulty of bringing all these together. That can't be solved, or just impractical to be solved with any existing technology. It's not about data cleaning. It's not about any of these other marketing frameworks such as data lakes or your proper interpretation of that often we see was data swamps.
Since you brought up the Obama role first, I want to have a few more questions there, and then I want to get onto your current company. On the Obama assignment, as I'll call it, you said you were driving the agenda. Where were you spending your time, and how do you define success? And then the second part to that question is, how do we compare against other countries?
Yeah, these are good questions. I'll answer the last one first.
Okay.
I think in pure research, I'm quite comfortable in saying that American research in AI remains the world leader. I think the only domain of academic research where I'd say China has leadership is in chemistry or chemical engineering, which can be important because that's the domain out of which we can have tangents to material science. So that can be important. But inside AI, despite the often quoted fear of them having the autocratic regime in China having fewer scruples about how they're collecting data or using the data, I'd say the underlying research is still better in the United States. There's very, very smart people there, but the research is still better in the United States. I think that could change, and the biggest concern that I have, that I'm really trying to address in my former work in the U.S. government and my work in trying to publish the book and even talking to you, is in bringing more people into this conversation. As lovely as it is to be talking with other technologists who understand these emerging tools, what's really important is that we bring more people into the conversation so that they can explore with us how they want this technology to be deployed in society in many of the gray areas that have emerged and will emerge. We want this technology to be embraced by the American and Western public and not resisted. That has a strong correlation, or it may be even deterministic, for how continued Western leadership in AI.
Thank you for being here, Eric. This has been very informational. You lived up to the hype. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And all listeners out there, thank you to you as well. Please let us know how we're doing. Reach out to us at almartintalksdata@gmail.com, and we will see you on the podcast. See you all later. Thank you.